Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us today. I'll just turn my camera on and say hello as well. So today I'm joined by photographer Kristina Varaksina. Are you there, Kristina?
Yes,
Hopefully.
I'm here. Hello,
Hey, Kristina.
guys.
Hi.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. And you're
Of
based out
course.
of New York, so thanks for taking the time to show us what you can do in Capture One.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for
Great.
having me.
And as usual, we've got up to 60 minutes today. We don't necessarily have to use all of it, but that's our max allotted time. We are recording the session as well. So you'll get a follow-up email, as this is a Friday. That will probably come Monday or Tuesday, I would think. You're very welcome and encouraged to submit your questions to myself and Kristina at any time. If you look on the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the last section is called questions. Put a question in there. That will come straight through to me, and then I'll feed the questions over to Kristina. And when you exit, hopefully not before the end, of course, please answer the exit survey. That will pop up once you exit. If you're watching on Android or iOS, you can still ask a question. All you need to do is tap the question mark icon you see on the screen, and you can ask a question in a similar way. So there we go. We're both on screen. That's good. So just tell us a little bit about your work, actually, before I hand over to you for Capture One.
Sure. So yeah, I'm based in New York. Like David said, I do fashion, beauty, advertising photography. I shoot portraits, and I do my personal work, which is fine art photography. That's represented by galleries around the world. So really all kinds of work, but mostly with people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as we were chatting just before we came online, you rushed back home today because you're also lecturing at, let me get it right, the New York Film Academy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very nice. And you've been doing that for over a year now, correct?
About 2.5 years. Been teaching different classes. It's retouching and photography classes, shooting and studio fashion classes. Yeah, so lots of fun.
Very nice. So I think what we're going to do today, I'm going to hand over the screen to you in a second, all being well. And you've got some images. I understand that we can see your process in Capture One.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so let me see. Let me just pass over control to you. So we should be able to make you the presenter. So if we wait and see, you should be able to see your screen. Fantastic. Okay, I'll turn my webcam off now so that this isn't too distracting. And yeah, as I said to everyone, you're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions. I can see you're doing that already. If we don't get to your question, I do apologize, as there is quite a lot of you, but we'll also keep a bit of time at the end as well. So over to you, Kristina. So there we go. So yeah, we can see your screen perfectly. And also, as we discussed beforehand, you're using the Fujifilm GFX, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I've been shooting with this medium format Fujifilm camera for about a year and a half now.
Nice.
And I've been enjoying it immensely, but the problem was until very recently that I couldn't shoot tethered to Capture One, and I couldn't process directly the raw files in Capture One, and that was really a disappointment in a way. So I had to I had to find my ways around it, and I had to do all kinds of manipulations to the files that I would get from that camera. Mostly I would convert them to DNG, and you will see some of these files are still in DNG formats that I did earlier this year.
Sure.
Some of them are already raw, like this shoot. But yeah.
It was definitely cumbersome to do it, that wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I got used to it eventually, going through all these several steps before I can get them into Capture One. But I mean, luckily we now have this support for Fujifilm, and I couldn't be happier.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. So, yeah. So, any Fuji fans listening, then it was just after Photokina last year. Then we announced support for, or better support for Fujifilm cameras, including tethered capture. So, I guess you do 99% of these kinds of shoots tethered to Capture One, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. 99%. I always shoot tethered to the computer.
Yeah.
Rarely, it's maybe when I'm on location, when I'm outside, which I don't do that often. And most of the time I'm in studio and I'm shooting tethered.
Great. Okay, so the image that we see on screen, that was part of a series of shots, wasn't it? If I remember, a project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This project was called, the series was called Lost and Found.
Hmm.
And it's kind of this like surrealistic element. She's in this dreamlike state where she's almost like an Alice in Wonderland, wandering around and trying to get into doors that are locked, or milk is pouring into glass by itself. This is not a final image, but in the retouch shot, I added this milk pouring into the glass here.
Mm.
But yeah, this is already a corrected shot. The initial image looked like this,
Okay.
and you can see that I've done quite a bit of uh, change in here, and then not only the color but also the tonal values. I corrected the way it looks, um, the lines in the image, so it's not so uh, angled and not so much distorted in that perspective. So I
Yeah.
corrected that. Yeah, so it's been, and I can take you through the steps that
Yeah,
I've
that would be
taken
great,
here. Yeah.
actually. Yeah, if you could do that, that would be fantastic.
So first, when I get an image, when I open the shoot, obviously I go through my shots and I look at the best, expressions, and the one that conveys the story in the best way, and when I get the right emotion, the right body language, that all kind of fits in the story that I'm trying to tell. So once that shot is selected, and sometimes it's two shots, and maybe I'll do a little composite in the end, but so far I was pretty happy with this one in particular. But the thing is, I'm shooting a little bit from a lower vantage point, so I
Mm.
had to correct the perspective here. And this is a really great tool, Keystone. I don't know if you guys have used it before, but when I talk to people and my students, for example, not so many people know about it for some reason.
No, I think
And
interior architecture photographers know about it, but it's actually, it was a photographer I had a long time ago on a webinar was using it for all kinds of different things. So it's nice to see you considering it for even this kind of shot as well.
yeah, I'm a straight line nerd. I always would try to correct everything should look straight and parallel in my images.
Right.
So this is just really great tool. It's super easy to use now. Everything is aligned. So that's kind of the first step. If I see something that is distorted, I try to fix that first.
Yeah, it
And
looks
then,
great now,
yeah,
and you'd never know you'd done the correction. It just looks like it was, the camera was perfectly mirrored to that shot.
yeah. So that's a very great tool that Capture One offers. And then my second step is I always check my layers. I'm on the background layer. I haven't created anything yet. So usually on the background layer, I would start doing tonal values, adjustments, and exposure correction if needed. So for example, here, and I always like using the curve first.
Hmm.
And by default, it comes in the RGB is activated, and I usually switch to Luma because I don't want any color information to be affected by my tonal values corrections. So
Hmm.
I can add a little bit of lights here, maybe a bit of midtones, and open up the shadows just tiny little bit. So that is usually enough. I don't go like too crazy, and it's already a big change, just like that. And then high dynamic range is kind of my second step. Fujifilm is capable of actually recording a lot of information into its raw
Yeah.
files, so I can push it a lot and pull out the shadows, and there's a lot of information. And also Capture One is really good at recovering that information. It looks very natural. It never, even if I push all the way both of the sliders, rarely it's gonna look like HDR file. It still looks quite natural. Sometimes the shadows look a little bit too pale, but overall it doesn't look too fake. And I've done this in other software, and then doesn't look that natural. So I really like this high dynamic range feature here. So
Yeah, I
yes,
had a guest last week who said similar thing regarding the highlight recovery in particular, that yeah, even pushed to extremes, it still looks nice and natural if you need to do that.
yeah. So I'm gonna zoom in so you can guys see. So without the highlight recovery, and it's with it. It does like a little slight change. It's not a big jump, but it's needed because you want to recover that information. Especially for me, it's important because I use artificial lights, strobes in studio a lot, and they tend to reflect off of the skin a lot, and then it creates really strong highlights, and they need to kind of bring that back a bit. So yeah, that's kind of my first step.
Great.
Adjust the tonal values, and then I go into the color correction tab here, and usually I make a separate layer for initial adjustments. And then I think, okay, what is the first thing I want to change in this picture? And usually it's a background. If it's a studio shot especially, it's probably going to be a background. So I can even name it like wall color, for example. And then I go to color editor first.
Okay.
And mostly I don't do much on basic, but I do on advanced. The only thing we need to do is to invert the mask first, otherwise I will not see anything. So
So
by default, it
effectively
puts a
sort of,
mask. Yeah.
yeah, filling the mask so that any adjustment that you do now is going to be like on the whole layer. I guess like a adjustment layer in Photoshop, if any Photoshop users out there who haven't used Capture One.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's just going to apply to the entire layer, and then I can adjust it with the eraser here if I need to
Okay.
mask some of the areas. Okay, so color editor, and then I'm going to pick that background color and adjust it slightly. So as you can see in my final result, it looks overall quite warmer. So I'm going to switch back to this, and first I'm going to adjust the hue here. So see, if I go to the right, it goes more purple, and if I go to the left, it goes a little bit more green. So a little bit of that, because I really wanted to bring out that green color of the walls. And sometimes I also play with the saturation, but in this case, I think I'm gonna maybe just a little bit desaturate it, just a tiny little bit. And I also would like to make it a little bit darker to get a little more separation between the model and the wall. Yeah, because in this particular shoot, I used a very, very soft light. It was a big source of light. It's 8x8 silk. It's a giant diffuser. So the light kind of spread out to the model and the rest of the set. And that's kind of what I was going for. But now I need to correct it just a little bit since I have this opportunity. So yeah, so I made it a little darker. So that's kind of what I wanted to do just on the wall. And then another area that I want to fix is the skin tones, because she looks a little too bluish, and there's a lot of magenta here. And overall skin tone across the body is changing, so it's not even.
Right.
So what I would like to do, I would make a separate layer for just skin, and I will invert it as well, so we can see it right away. By the way, when I zoom in, you can also see that her eyeshadow kind of has similar color as the wall, and I can check if my color correction in the color editor affected the eyeshadow at all. So if I go and turn off my wall color layer, I can see if it did anything to it. It looks like it didn't, but if it did, I can always go and activate that mask and just erase it with an eraser from the mask. It's very quick and easy. Just take out this area, and it's not going to be affected by that color adjustment that I've made. So yeah, so back to the skin tone adjustments. So going back to color editor, next to advanced, there's a really cool feature that I love, and I'm sure if you guys have used it, you also really like it. So I'm going to zoom in on the skin, and I'm going to sample the skin in the area where I think that skin tone looks good. And here I can see the selected color range, and if I don't quite like it, I can always adjust it. So I can move this a bit and maybe go a little bit towards more natural. It was a little too much in the magenta area. So now it looks closer to what I want, and I can start adjusting the overall tones that are selected here. I can also preview my selected color range. So basically it desaturates everything that is not selected. And if it looks like something is missing, I can always adjust this sector here until I get it more fully selected. And first, I can play with the hue overall of the skin and make it maybe a little bit not so bluish. So let me zoom out so you can see. I don't know if you can guys see the difference. If I'm going here, it's making it a little more cooler and more magenta, and if I go here, that's a little bit more green.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and it is a more like the skin tone tool is kind of designed for correcting or fine correction. It doesn't quite have the same adjustment range as the advanced tab, but skin tone has nuances and sort of fine edit. So the skin tone tab is designed just to be a little bit more subtle as well.
Yeah, it's definitely more subtle. And then there's also a smoothness slider here to make sure how much of that range you want to correct. As you can see that I have this dress here as well that is very, very similar tone as the skin tone. And if you have colors like that, that's going to be an issue unless you mask it. That's why it's good to have this skin correction on a separate layer. So yeah, after I adjust the hue itself as much as I wanted, and maybe desaturate it a little bit, because I'm kind of going for a little bit that greenish overall look, like you can see in this picture. It doesn't look like quite real. So I tend to desaturate my skin tones a little bit in all of my pictures, and in this one it's really important to kind of match this whole environment. And then I go to the uniformity part. that's where I'm going to address that issue of being very uneven. So if I move the hue slider, it's going to even out the tones. So everything that does not look like this is going to try and bring it closer to this tone. And the reason why it might not be working like completely on the hand, it's probably because I did not select it initially in that
Yeah, just
range.
might widen the range a little bit would probably do
Yeah.
it. Well, yeah.
Yeah, so I would adjust that until I get it covered completely. So for example, like here somewhere, now you can see that it's now selected. I can move that a little bit here. And now I can start adjusting and maybe a little less of the here of the yellow. Okay, so yeah, that looks good. So you can see the further I move the slider, the more even that skin tone becomes.
Nice.
Like, but I try to not go all the way because then it starts looking a little too fake.
Yeah,
Because still we
you need to
have,
have some realism. Yeah.
yeah, as human beings, we never have completely even skin, and all the trends in fashion photography go towards more imperfections rather than looking too perfect.
Yep.
So it's just to color correct things like that. It works really well. And I can also apply the uniformity slider to if I have also saturation issues somewhere or lightness, which I may do a little bit, but mostly I use the hue slider here. Another thing, usually in makeup on the model, the blush and the lipstick, they tend to have the same color values as the skin tone itself. So sometimes you need to go to your layers and get an eraser and maybe like at a little bit lower opacity kind of erase that, so you bring that blush back and the lipstick as well. So your model doesn't look too pale and too one tone, kind of solid color. So yeah, once these all corrections are done, so your background color is corrected, your skin tones are corrected, then I can do next step, which can be the overall color grading.
Mm-hmm.
So name it color balance or color grading. So I prefer doing it as a last step because I need to first see what I can do with the initial colors, how I want to adjust them, and then I can apply final touches to the picture. And I really like this color balance tool because it separates all the tones into 3 groups and applies the color correction separately. So we have shadow, we have midtone, and we have highlight. And I can preview them all at once on the screen. So for example, I want the shadows to be a little warmer in this case. And overall, I think I want my picture to be a tiny bit warmer. And my midtones, also maybe I want to add a little bit of that warmth to them. Mm-hmm. And what is also great that and then for example I add some cyan to the highlights, just a tiny little bit. And what is also great, you can adjust the saturation of that color that you are applying on the left side. So let me move a little more so you can see. And you can also adjust the tonal value of that color also on the right side. So you can make your highlights darker or brighter here with this slider. Let me see. I think I did not invert this one, so that
Yeah,
happens to me.
that should do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see it now. Jumped into it right away. So yeah, you can see that I can make the highlights much brighter here or darker here. So it's not only in the dynamic range tab where you can change this, but also in the color balance, you can also affect the brightness or the intensity of your highlights or your shadows. So that's also a fun feature. Another thing that I would like to do in this image is to maybe just play around a little bit with the white balance. And I know most people started in the beginning, and I do sometimes too, but sometimes I do it as like a final touch when I already did my color grading and the color balance here. And if I still feel like it's could be a little warmer or a little cooler, I can adjust it in the white balance. Because what I'm doing, I'm not going for the very realistic looking picture, and I'm not shooting landscapes, for example, or lifestyle people. I'm making something more, you know, more artistic in a way, and like with my own color palette, my own vision. So I can play with the color balance and play with the colors and shift them however I want it. So, but if I were to go and shoot something like a landscape, I would probably start with the white balance first, or a product photography when you photograph clothes on the model and things like that. That it's important to make the colors look accurate. Then definitely you would start with the white balance. But in my case, I can leave it as a final step. And I normally don't apply any sharpening or any grain or anything like that to my image. I tend to process it the way it is, and then I have this several process recipes here, and then I apply those as final steps after I do the retouching, because you need to see the clear skin texture here and retouch it first, and then apply grain and things like that.
Do you apply the grain back into Capture One on the Photoshop file, or something you do in Photoshop?
I've tried doing both, and it really depends on how much processing I'm doing to the image. But normally, like most of the time, I just do it in Photoshop. Yeah.
Excellent. Question from Greg. I think you sort of answered it as you went through, actually. I think because you're skilled in Photoshop and that's your background. So Greg was asking about thoughts on just doing everything on the background layer as opposed to splitting it up into layers. So what's your reasoning sort of for doing the color grading on a different layer and other elements on different layers, when in theory you could, I guess, combine it all onto the background layer?
Yeah, I could, but sometimes you need to go back and like I said, I picked up that green. It could have picked up also the green on the shadow and darkened it or changed the color the way I did not want. Or when I started adjusting the skin tones, maybe in this case, that was kind of the idea of the shoot, that her dress is the same tone as the skin.
Yeah.
But what if I didn't want? Maybe it was really important that this color of the dress stays very accurate, and so I would then mask it out. So that allows me to create separate masks for different areas on every single layer. And then color balance as my like final color grading to this image. I can always turn it off and on and see. It just allows me to see image a little bit differently, and I prefer having it on a separate layer. And any layer, I can always go back and turn it off and see what I've done. So it's easier for me to kind of go back in the history and locate what changes I've done to each particular image. So it makes my process a little bit easier if I need to readjust something.
Yeah, and I mean, for me also, if I came back to it the next day, quite often I then change something else or vary the opacity of a layer, or it just kind of dissects the image into those different elements, and I think you get a better result at the end of the day, and you're a bit more willing to experiment because it's so easy seeing it split into those different layers.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with that, that it makes it, you know, much easier to experiment. Yes, because you can try this and that and then turn off this layer and make another one and turn it back and compare. And yeah, definitely. And I really like this feature is pretty recent, the opacity, that you can really change it and adjust how much of that color grading, for example, you want to apply to your image. It's great.
And a question from, it was Jan, I think. Yes, Jan. Have you played with any of the film simulation profiles in the GFX, or have you just sort of leave all your color grading to Capture One?
I have played, and sometimes I would shoot JPEG and RAW at the same time. RAW obviously is because I only work with RAW, but JPEGs, I would keep them next to the RAWs as my reference, and I would change my film simulations from like shot to shot or from look to look, and then when I start processing my RAW files, I look at those JPEGs and I see, okay, this is actually a good idea, like higher contrast, cooler highlights, darker shadows, something like that, and that gives me an idea what I can do with my RAWs. But there are also film simulations presets now, or user styles, I should say, offered by Capture One that I played around a little bit as well. And there is the film one. The film is really fun, and I wanted to show you guys on this particular image. So this one, nothing is really done to it, but I will have this as a comparison. So it really, basically in one click, it creates a finished image, and I really liked it. It really worked on this beauty shoot because I don't have a lot of colors that I need to worry about. It's mainly it's so like limited. It's just a skin tone, this almost black of the hair and white of the background. So it's very simple, and you can see the result very clearly on all this film presets. And some of them add grain. Let me zoom in and show you, like this one, which is kind of like you can just export it and you're done. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to do any Photoshop.
that's always nice. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, well, can I just do Capture One and no Photoshop? And everyone is kind of looking for that magic pill. And I think, you know, these presets are pretty amazing, and it just looks so great.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Capture One will never be, well, I shouldn't say never, but Capture One is not, if you like, a Photoshop replacement, because it's a raw converter, asset manager, image editor, and so on. But I think the gap between applications like Capture One and Photoshop has narrowed over the past, 5 years or so, because of layers and better masking and adding grain and luminosity masking and all those other tricks which never existed in raw converters before. So yeah, I think the gap is definitely narrowing. So with some images, I'm sure you could avoid Photoshop, but Capture One is not a retouching application, but it will give you the best start before you get to that, of course.
So that's before and after with one of the film presets.
Nice.
And it's pretty dramatic change. Yeah, and I feel like I don't need to do any color adjustments, any color grading. The skin tone looks pretty even and almost done.
Looks
So
great.
it's perfect. Yeah. Yeah, obviously you can do like that skin retouching and all that compositing in Capture One. It's not for that, but a lot of photographers don't even need to do that. So I think you can do the majority of work in Capture One because of all these features that are, like you just said, there's more and more coming up, like that luminosity masking, for example. It's really amazing. I've been doing that in Photoshop for a long, long time, doing color corrections with luminosity masking, and now I can do it here.
Even better. Oh, a quick question from Morris. He was asking about DNG, but as I understand, the DNG files you have, that was before we supported the GFX, so you kind of had to do a sneaky workaround to get the images in Capture One, correct?
Yeah, correct, absolutely.
So now I assume you don't bother converting to DNG.
Yeah.
Now there we go, Morris.
Totally
there is no
fine.
benefit to converting to DNG, so yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I wanted to show this image as an example of, again, having those similar tones, and I wanted to correct the color in the background without affecting her skin, for example, and I can show you. So that's the final result. That's how I started. See, it looks pretty dull, and I wanted to bring out that orange and that orange in her hair and make it look much more vibrant. So I can show you the layers that I applied here. So it's my background, and there's my background color. So that's just done on the background, and you can see that it's, let me turn off the other one, that is not affecting the skin. So I can turn on the mask, and you can see, did it really quickly. But yeah, so it's affecting the background and the hair, but not the skin. So that's the
that was
background.
just a quick mask you just drew by hand, I guess.
Yeah. And you can always, grab an eraser and adjust it if you need to, and you can be, much precise with your masks. But for this tutorial, I just quickly drew it so you can guys see. And then you turn off the mask. For skin and makeup, I did a separate layers. Let me zoom in so you can see again. But, so I enhanced this yellow color a little bit, and overall you can see that I made this texture a little bit more contrasty, and made her skin tone a little more darker and a little more warm, a little more golden kind of tone to it. So that was in this layer, you can see, and I'll show you my mask. So it was just done for the face, because this picture is, a lot of tones are the same, or mainly this is all almost one color palette. So when you start selecting something in your color editor or in your skin tones, that's the color range that it picks up, and it's basically everything in this picture, almost everything. So you have to do masks. So
Michael was asking, do you do auto masking, or are you just sort of quite nifty with the brush? And he was asking if do you use a relatively hard brush, or keep it soft, or is there any sort of go-to adjustments or brush settings that you tend to go for?
It really depends on the edge on the image, on a particular area. So with the hair, I wanted really soft edge, so I would take a really soft brush or soft eraser in this case. I wanted to keep this area affected, for example. And then I would erase with a really blurry, like, let me show you, like zero hardness, big size, maybe like this edge. I would go around, so it doesn't have a hard edge and abrupt transition. I wanted to kind of smooth, blend into the skin.
I
And
often
then,
find auto masking is probably the worst thing you can do, because it just looks really obvious then that you've tried to separate something out.
yeah, exactly. And every edge is different. So for example, on
Yeah.
the hair here, it's so soft. And then like if I were to select the background, so between the background and the hair, this transition is very blurry. And then when the background meets the face here, then suddenly the edge is not so soft anymore. So I would need to, make the brush smaller and maybe a little harder and just go around the edge to kind of match the amount of blur that is already there, the blurriness on this edge here. So yeah, I would need to adjust every edge according to what I'm dealing with in the photo.
It looks really seamless, like you'd never know you'd mask that at all.
Yeah, and then I mean this wasn't a hard image to mask. Like
No.
some of them are more complicated. But yeah. So yeah, that's this one. Another one I wanted to show you where I've done quite a lot, and you can see the difference. So the way it came out of the camera, the background was just gray. And then I noticed, because this whole image is about color and the colorful makeup, I felt like I needed some extra pop somewhere. So I decided to turn the background blue. And I'll show you, it was really easy to do. Let me show you the layers first here. So it's just the background and makeup and skin here. So yeah, separate layer for the background. Maybe I'll name it wall so it has a different name. And inverted. And here it was really easy to do because it picks up that color very easily. There's not much of this gray color anywhere in the picture. And then I just added some saturation to it and changed the hue a little bit. And I can also turn it just like that. Maybe even go all the way up on the saturation and add a little more. There. And if this if you want even more adjustment and get it even more blue, for example, you can always select this one more time and
Yeah, that's quite a good tip. If you sort of run out of adjustments on one color pick, if you just pick the color again, you can double up if you
yeah.
like, or triple up. Yeah.
So for example, you click on it again and go.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So kind of. So you can, yeah, exactly like you said, triple up, double up. And you can make that smoothness. That this is where it really comes helpful, because this is quite a different edge here around the ear and here. I usually play around the smoothness until I make that a little more seamless. When I start changing that color, okay, let me see the hue. Okay, and make it a little lighter, maybe. So the rest of the image is not affected except for the eye. You can guys see that the eye is also blue. So, and then I would go back to the layer and grab an eraser and erase just from that area. And turn on my mask. So yeah, it's very easy and quick to do. but it allowed me to change the color of the background very fast without making a mask like I would do, for example, in Photoshop, make an adjustment layer and the mask and all those things. It's just because it was the only gray area, except for the eye, the only gray area in the image. It was really easy to change its color. Yeah. Should I go over and show you guys what I did with the makeup here?
Yeah, definitely.
So you can see that this image is also quite lighter as well. So I would go back to the background layer to change my tonal values. Maybe I'll add a bit of curve here. Maybe tiny little bit of contrast. Yeah, something like that. And then I can have a separate layer for just the skin and makeup. And makeup. Forget to invert it so we can see. And go to my color editor first in advanced mode. I'll try and pick that color.
Tiny little piece of makeup to pick.
Yeah, but since that was an idea, I had to make it work. And maybe I don't want that orange also to show up, so I would adjust this range again. Selected color range, yeah.
And just to explain to people, when you adjust the color editor, GoToWebinar kind of doesn't represent the cursor in the right way. So basically that range, what Kristina's doing is just clicking on the edge of that range and then making it narrower or wider. It's just on GoToWebinar, the cursor looks a bit strange for whatever reason. So, but if you try it yourself at home, you'll see you can just change the range by making it wider or narrower, and the saturation range, which is the top of the wedge and the bottom of the wedge. So yeah, it's just a little GoToWebinar interesting aspect. But yeah, the cursor doesn't normally fly around like that.
Okay, so yeah, I would adjust the selected range and the smoothness of it. So if there's some color that I don't want to be affected, basically. So yeah, I brought out some green, a little more, or this neon. So just a little more saturated. If I want to do, I can pull it all the way. And then this maybe a little bit of purple. Just tiny little bit saturation on that one. And don't want to affect any pink tones in the skin, so I need to adjust that as well. So let me show you before and after. I hope you guys can see it. Let me zoom in.
Oh yeah, we can definitely see a difference. Yep. Nice extra boost of color and saturation for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very subtle, but it kind of helps the idea since we have this very delicate kind of makeup. It wasn't gonna be obvious anyway, but yeah, I wanted to just bring out just a little more of that saturation. And then also on the same layer, I can do some skin tone corrections a little bit. I can make it a little lighter and maybe add some saturation to it just a little bit, and maybe add some uniformity to the skin.
So what additional work would you do in Photoshop? Just sort of blemish removal and skin smoothing, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, not much in this image. I think what I did on this one, I just cleaned up the eye, the vessels, the blood vessels in the eye.
Sure.
Maybe a little on these hairs here, but it was really minimum. Not
But
a lot of
the
work.
kind of work you can say is done in Capture One.
Yeah, for sure. I always use Capture One for the majority of the color work. I may do some contrast adjustments or something like that as one of my last steps in Photoshop, but color work is primarily in Capture One, especially now with the luminosity masks.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
we've got time for one more, I think.
Great.
I told you
So
an hour went quickly.
yeah, this series, this one was shot for Harper's Bazaar last summer, and it was supposed to be a fall issue, and it was shot in the middle of the summer, so the grass looks like the greenest green possible.
Yeah.
And so I needed to do quite a lot of color corrections and tonal adjustments to it as well.
Mm.
So you can see it looks almost nothing like the initial shot on the right. Yeah, the light was super contrasty, and even though we were using reflectors, diffusers, it's still quite a big contrast here. So I needed to correct that. And a lot of times I actually like my images to look more flat. And what I do, I start with a curve. So like I already said, on the background layer, I would go to tonal adjustments and curve here, and in Luma mode, so I'm not affecting any of the color information. So I would pull the shadow up and the highlights down, and that's how I'm making it more flat, so it's not so contrasty. And I would, keep on pulling it until I like it, basically. And you can experiment with this curve, or you can see on the presets that you get on the styles, user styles, you can actually study when you apply them. You can go and break it down what those styles do to your images, and see what curves do, what color adjustments do, how that affects the image. But yeah, because I already know what I kind of want, I always do this thing to the Luma curve. So yeah, making it a little more flat, and then it's kind of already closer to that the amount of contrast that I have in this one. And then there's quite a bit of color correction, so I can show you here. So corrections first I did to the grass, because you can see it's really, really intense green. And so I made it more yellow, and then I applied an overall color balance. And I also corrected the blue a little bit on this layer. So if we go to my color editor advanced, you can see that I picked these 3 colors, and sometimes it's 5 or 6 of them here, maybe more than, yeah. So depending on how many things you need to change. So yeah, and it does a pretty good job, because there's not much other green in the picture, and I can always adjust it here as well if there's anything else that I don't want to be affected. And
It seems you're quite a fan of the color editor.
yeah, color editor and color balance, I think,
Yeah.
are my 2 favorites.
It's definitely 2 of the strongest tools in Capture One, yes.
Yeah, so I would actually do that again on a separate layer, just in case. And I can name it color corrections, because I know that it's going to be a lot of them, not just the grass, but yeah. And invert it here, and now I can start doing that. So it's just super easy, no masking needed. It's so fast to do, to just change one color. I just love this tool. Let's
Hey, we've
see
got
if
a
I can
question
again.
from John Edward. He was asking, can you add styles to a specific part of the image? And yes, you can. So actually, you can right click on any style and say add to a layer. So you can have a style as a layer. So then, of course, you could erase parts of that layer, so the style would only show on, like, the in this case, I guess, the background or the model or something else. So yes, you can. Sorry to answer that for you, Kristina, but I
No,
thought
that's great
it
actually.
was easier. Yeah.
I've never done that before. I save styles and then apply them to my next images, but I
Yeah.
never apply the style to a layer. Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
a great tip.
Yeah, it can be handy sometimes. It's not something I do myself a lot, but very occasionally, if you just want, a style on the image, but if you think, you know what, it doesn't look too great on this part of the image, maybe it messes up the skin tone or something, then yeah, you can just punch a hole in the mask and just have it where you need. So yes. So Jean Edward, just right click on the style, add to new layer, and then you have all the control you need.
That's great.
Hmm.
Okay, so I also changed the color of the sky here. And if that color also picks up the color on the clothing here as well, which I think it does a little bit, so because that's more like the color that it was, that I can again go to my layers and mask it out, just the suit here. So I'm gonna adjust my brush size and opacity 100% in this case because we want to mask out completely. And as you get closer to the edges, you may need to adjust the sharpness. So yeah, the suit, I need to go around here.
Are you a Wacom tablet user or mouse user, or what's your preferred method?
Wacom tablet, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right now I'm trying to do it on my touchpad and on the laptop, but usually I do it with a Wacom tablet.
Yeah, well, you're doing very well for a touchpad. I completely failed to try and do it for on a touchpad. But yeah, if you're seriously into masking, then Wacom is the way to go, and you don't have to spend tons of money on top of the range stuff. Just one of the base Wacom models makes it much easier and more comfortable for masking.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I always recommend my students to invest. Even you can buy even a used one. They last very long. But the first one I had it for like 7 years, I think.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it wasn't dying, and I was thinking it's too old. I want to change you. When are you gonna die? Yeah.
It's true. I mean, I have a couple of old tablets lying around, and there's nothing wrong with them. The only thing that wears down is the tips, really, but they're
Yeah, they
fortunately
had a
replaceable.
replacement one.
Yeah. But I often found when I'm talking about Wacom, most people don't realize in the pen holder there's about 7 spare tips if you unscrew the bottom. So that's always a nice little thing to discover if you didn't know.
Yeah. No, it's super convenient and super, makes your process so much faster.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Then on this one, I would do the skin tone corrections as well because she has good skin tone on the face, but then slightly pink on the hands and very magenta on the feet. I think it's a color cast from the dress as well. On top of that, yeah. So yeah, I would do the skin tone adjustments like I showed before. And once this is done, because this is a whole series, I would usually either create a preset on color balance and all this,
Mhm.
and apply, or just copy and paste the whole thing to the next image. So I can do it on an example of this one. So let me show you, so that they kind of match and go with the same style. Let me see the mask. Sometimes when you copy the whole thing, you get copy the mask as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, if you're
Well,
copying everything, then yeah, just always worth checking the layers in case there's anything like that. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Well,
but
that's
that's
a cheat, isn't it?
quick and easy to adjust that. You just right click on your layer and just say fill mask,
Yeah,
and it just fills it. So it's not a problem. But
perfect.
yeah, so it's, it becomes, looking more cohesive, and then from here you can continue adjusting, like, because sometimes, from shot to shot you have still different colors, different color temperature. You may need to check your white balance, or you need to
Mm.
adjust some specific tones. Like I think the sky here doesn't match the blue here, so I would adjust that. And maybe I would desaturate the grass just a tiny little bit because it's more intense than this one. But the base is already here, and that's what's important here.
Yeah, that gets the majority of the work then, doesn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
fantastic. Well, I think, sadly, as it always is, we are coming out of time. So I'm gonna hop back on webcam as well. I was just gonna ask you a couple of other questions before we have to go. So who was that asking? That was Kate, I think, wanted to know, where do you get your sort of inspiration and ideas from? What's is it all from within you, or do you have any sort of regular sources that you go for?
Definitely. I have my favorite painters that
Okay.
I keep looking back at and studying their work, like Hammershoy, for example. It's a Danish, I think, painter, so you can guys check him out. Um, mm, yeah, like painters, definitely, the Magritte and Dali and all the surrealistic period. And then I like watching movies. I get
Okay.
really inspired by someone else's, how they construct the frame, the
Hmm.
camera they use, the lighting they use in the scene, the props, how they tell the story within one frame. So I get inspired by that as well. Another source of inspiration, I not constantly, but quite often go to models.com because I shoot fashion and I
Mm.
need to kind of keep myself up to date with all the current trends and all the recent campaigns, all the recent editorials, and all the lookbooks and everything is there, so I can check about any brand, what they're doing, any magazine, what they're doing right now. So it's a really good source. So yeah.
Fantastic. And Michael was asking, or yeah, Michael, it is Michael. Sorry, Michael, I was going to call you Michelle for a second. He says he follows you on Instagram and thinks you're fantastic. Do you have a book,
Thank
or
you.
do you plan to publish a book in the future?
I haven't thought about it.
Maybe you
uh,
should.
yeah, who knows. Well, I tend to work in smaller projects. It's
Mm,
like this series that I showed you, that Lost and Found series, or Magic Realism is more recent. They like very small, unless I do a book that consists of different series, or maybe I'll come up with another project that's going to be very, very long, and I'll
a bigger
make a
book.
book. Yeah, yeah, good
But
idea. Thank you for suggestion.
yeah, I think that would be a great idea. But do you do any print sales? Am I right in thinking you sell prints?
Yeah, I sell prints. Not like I don't really do directly, but my galleries that represent me sell prints yeah, I print sometimes myself as well, but mostly they do it. Yeah.
So Michael's just got to visit the galleries and buy lots of prints then, basically. Make his own book. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, or just hang them on the walls.
Yeah.
I have some prints at home that I'm actually selling right now. So if you want to reach out to me and talk about this.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to grab the screen back from you for a second. And in case anyone is interested, just to let everyone know, next week is kind of just a webinar about processing. So much what you saw Kristina do today, but you'll have to make do with me, which is far less interesting. It's just basically to run through 3 or 4 images and just go through some processes in Capture One, just like what we did here with Kristina. So not one particular tool, but stringing a whole bunch of different stuff together. So that's next week. Look out for a follow-up email Monday or Tuesday, something like that. And it will have details of where to find the recording and also how to get to our learning hub. So who was asking that? That was Steve Montgomery. Steve, yeah, or anyone else in Steve's position who's newish to Capture One. The learning hub, which is simply learn.phaseone.com. Let me just type it in the chat window so you can see it. Learn.phaseone.com, like so. That's got loads of resources for getting started and more in-depth stuff. So thanks again, Kristina, for joining. That was really interesting. It's always nice to get an insight into someone else's work. So thanks for doing that and rushing back from work to do it for us.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
No, it was great. And I can't thank you enough for spending the time. So thanks, everybody. And thanks, Kristina. And hope to see you all again soon. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye, Kristina. Bye.
Bye, David.